Right, good morning and welcome. For those who do not know me, I'm Dave Collins. I'm the Client Services Director of Poundgate and Chartered Insurance Brokers based in Ipswich and currently in many homes in the area too. It is a pleasure to be a host for this event. Firstly, thank you for taking the time out to join us today for our first Risky Business webinar. It's entitled Preparing for a Return to the Workplace, What Do Employers Need to Consider? Before the pandemic, some of you will have attended our Risky Business breakfasts, which were held at Ipswich Town Football Club. Those are the days when you could still meet in groups larger than 6 and network and have a full English breakfast. Certainly missed those. But they're also the days when Ipswich could actually score a goal. Now it's been over 10 hours, shows how poor they've got over recent times. Anyway, that seems such a long time ago now, and so much has happened since, but the optimist in me says the worst is now behind us. COVID-19 has clearly been a significant change for us all, both in business and personally. However, the government has recently announced its roadmap out of the lockdown and the phased closure of the furlough scheme. The vaccine programme is well underway, so today we'll be looking forward as it's time to start thinking about the future and plan how we're going to come back stronger than before. There will no doubt be some tricky issues that businesses will face when they reopen and or return to the workplace. And at Poundgate, we're currently considering how we can return safely to the workplace. And I know many businesses are doing the same, whether they'll be office-based employees, permanent home working, or a mix of both. Today, we'll be focusing on the health and safety and HR implications that you need to consider as part of your plans, as well as how you can protect yourself from these risks with the right insurance products. We'll be finished no later than midday. So it's time to introduce our speakers today. Charlotte Bate, Director of Mad HR. Charlotte manages their team of HR consultants. She has over 15 years experience as an HR professional, trainer and coach. Charlotte supports a diverse cross-section of businesses across most industries, from marketing to manufacturing, construction and charities, retail and hospitality, to name a few. Then Terry Pright, Relationship Manager at Poundgate, will be our second speaker. Terry has worked in the insurance industry since 2003. Terry has a proven track record of working with small, mid-market, corporate and global clients. He is able to quickly understand the logistical operations of a business and identify and recommend solutions for the immediate and emerging risk exposures. Terry holds a certificate of insurance with the Insurance Institute, and he enjoys spending time with his family, friends, and going for walks in the countryside with his dog Lulu. Then our last speaker today will be Matthew Gowan, who's partner of Burkett's. Burkett's are a top 100 UK law firm based in Ipswich. Matthew heads the firm's regulatory and corporate defence team, and he specialises in advising and representing organisations and directors in all areas of corporate and regulatory crime, health and safety and environmental. He's heavily involved in incident investigation work that the team carries out with the support of its health and safety consultants for a variety of clients across a wide range of sectors. Matthew won the Employed Advocate of the Year Award at the Employed Bar Awards 2017 and is recommended and named as a leading individual by Legal 500. So without further ado, can I hand over to Charlotte Bate of Mad HR, who's our first speaker.
Thanks, Dave. Thank you for that. Good morning, everyone. So, as Dave said, I'm going to be covering a few of the HR aspects to consider. And even with the government roadmap that's been outlined, there's still a multitude of questions and dilemmas that this will throw up for leaders across the country. And so that clarity of thought, that really strong leadership, that tenacity, having really engaged teams that are ready for action are all key ingredients to success during these really uncertain times still. And there's plenty of action which can be taken right now in order to come out of the traps flying. So as I say, I'm going to take you through a few of the areas for you to consider as you are preparing for your return to the workplace in whatever guise that may be. So there are still a number of unknowns, and I'd like us to look at some of those things which we do know. So one of them is that the vaccine programme is very clearly underway, which is great news. However, there's still some trepidation as not everyone has had the opportunity to take the vaccine as part of that programme. There's still a lot of public debate in terms of the side effects of the vaccine, and that has started to raise questions about if people are going to take the second dose or not. And then we've also got to consider those people who haven't yet had the opportunity to take the vaccine, or those that even if they are given the opportunity, they may choose not to take that for themselves. Equally, the government guidance is clear that those that can still need to be remain working from home. However, I've spoken to a number of business leaders and they have actually taken the decision to allow their teams back to work because in their view, the risk to their team's emotional and physical well-being, in their opinion, clearly outweighs the risk of returning to a COVID-safe workplace. Equally, social distancing, that's looking set to continue not only in public spaces but also in the workplace. And then that kind of leads us on to the next point, really, about how people are feeling about returning to work. Some employees are still worried about returning to the workplace, what that new world will look like. Will it be safe to go back? And if I do go back, then is it going to be like it is before? How is that going to have changed? Actually, I quite like staying at home. I like working from home, or indeed I like being in furlough. So that has brought up a number of different challenges for individuals as well. Without a doubt, people have learned to work and communicate and operate more flexibly with great results. And we've seen that across the board. We've talked to many leaders that have spoken about productivity and efficiency. The staying the same are actually increasing, which is great. However, at what cost? And we're going to be exploring that a little bit more about how high productivity is actually masking exhaustion. And we'll talk a bit more about that a little bit later. So what does the future of business what does it look like for your business? And the reality is that that's going to be very different for every business, and that's also going to be different for each individual of the business. And I love this quote from George Anders from LinkedIn, saying, be ready to build a new plan, not just once, but maybe 2, 3, 4 times, because what worked in your business for your business and your people in April, it may not be the same as November. And what I love about that quote is the fact that it's about, yes, you need to have a plan, but really it's about going back regularly, revisiting it. Does it still fit with the business? And importantly, does it still work for the people of the business that are required to deliver that plan as well? This is a moving feast, and we have to be agile. We have to be able to adjust accordingly as well, because the reality is that COVID, it's changed social systems, it's changed economies, it's changed consumer behaviours, it's changed what customers are expecting and what their values are and what it is that they demand. So we have to be agile, we have to constantly adapt what it is that we're doing to stay on top and in front of it. So what does that mean? We are going to be covering a number of areas, and just so that you've got a bit of a flavour of what we're going to be going through, what practically do you need to consider when it comes to preparing for your return to the workplace? I'm going to be giving you a bit of information about retention, because that's going to be impactful on all businesses. We're going to talk a bit about burnout, and really importantly, we're going to cover engaging teams as well. So moving swiftly on to preparing for a return to work, how can you get your house in order? So how are your workforce going to be returning? And again, this is going to be different for different businesses. Are they going to remain home working indefinitely moving forward? Are they going to be returning to the workplace, or are they going to be, are you going to be adopting a hybrid working model? What that means is going to be different things for different businesses, and there's going to be different knock-on effects to each of those methods of working. as you're preparing for your employees to return, then you need to consider, well, what do you need to have in place? And Matthew from Burkitt's is going to helpfully cover off a number of those different scenarios, particularly from a health and safety perspective. But when it comes to the physical layout, what I wanted you to think about is that for some, home working has been so successful. It's been hugely beneficial. People have been able to get a bit more of a work-life balance because they haven't had that commute into work. And actually, the prospect of continuing that indefinitely is absolutely a thumbs up for them. On the flip side of that, there are others that have been working from home and they've had enough. They do not want that to continue indefinitely. Whilst it was there as a temporary measure, it was doable. But actually, if that continues in the future, then that may prompt them to consider their job role or moving to a different employer because they're craving going back to that workspace. When it comes to the physical layout of the organisation, in addition to the kind of health and safety, social distancing, COVID safe elements that Matthew's going to be talking about, it's also really worth thinking about how you can create a really compelling and energetic workspace that creates a real sense of collaboration and community amongst your team, something which actually your team members can't get from working from home. So that's going to encourage them to want to return to work. It's going to help with engagement. It's going to help with retention, which is going to have a knock-on effect on productivity and innovation as well. When it comes to training, take the time to re-induct team members as they're coming back into the workplace. So re-onboarding, reinduction, whatever it is that you want to call it, and there's a number of different ways, but really now is the time to really re-engage with those team members wherever they may be located. Re-engage them in the business plan, re-engage them with the values of the business. What is it that we're going for? And help them to understand what's new within the workplace in terms of the processes, the systems, the technologies, it's about training and upskilling people and also giving them a bit of a refresh. Equally, if you are planning on changing somebody's job role as a result of the business needs changing, you might be changing their hours of work, you may be changing their location, their place of work as well. Does your documentation allow you to do this? So this is where we're getting into that kind of policy and procedure element of it. How are you going to approach it? And you really need to have a good understanding of contractually and your documentation wise, where is your starting point? Because that's going to help you determine how you can move forward with that. Because ultimately you want to be spending your time working, on your business and helping your business to succeed rather than combating employee grievances or claims for things like breach of contract or unlawful deduction of wages and things like that. Policies are going to be really important in terms of setting the expectation from employees, and many organisations have allowed flexibility and flexible practices coming into their business, and they've had to adapt their policies as a result of those, especially when it comes to time off for remote working, for flexible working schedules and things like that. And when it comes to hybrid working, the devil is in the detail with your policies. If you've got a number of different groups working in different ways, you may have to adapt your policy so that it speaks to specific areas of the business. So ensure that you understand what all of your practices are and make sure that your documentation reflects that as well. I'm not going to talk too much about insurance policies because Terry's going to be covering that, but that is something that is incredibly important. Do you have the cover that you need in light of bringing people back and all of the different stages of the business in terms of your reopening? And when it comes to technology, I found this interesting article, the Microsoft Trends Index, it shows that 42% of employees say that they lack the office essentials in terms of equipment right now. So even after over a year of home working, they still haven't got the equipment that they need to be working remotely. And actually 1 in 10 don't have an adequate internet connection to do their job properly. Now, I'm sure that we've all kind of been on meetings, Teams, Zoom meetings, you know, where it gets a bit pixely and when you blur in and out. And, you know, having the tools needed to be able to work in different locations is so important for productivity, but also, you know, for engagement and for morale. When it comes to cyber security as well, information security, this is absolutely rife. You need to assess the risks of your business in terms of those phishing and data thefts attempts. Special consideration also needs to be considered for those home workers or those people working in a more agile way. To ensure that those standards and the highest standards are adhered to and continued, and that is exactly the same for data protection as well. So when it comes to GDPR, are all the employees and team members, are they aware of what their obligations are? Are they compliant? There's lots, you know, about, we're getting lots of questions in terms of, you know, if somebody's got COVID, do we need to tell everybody? Well, no, absolutely not, because that is sensitive information. That will be a breach of GDPR. So, you know, you just need to be aware of what your obligations are, and making sure that everybody is absolutely, you know, working towards that. What I wanted to talk to you for a little bit about is burnout, because with the ability to log on wherever and whenever you like, the boundaries between home and work, they're well and truly blurred. So the benefits of working practices and remote working, flexible working practices and remote working, they're really clear, and I've spoken about that earlier. But productivity is being cited widely as either remaining unchanged or increasing. And what is the cost of that? Well, the stats that you can see on screen, more than half of UK employees say that they've been expected to work outside of regular working hours during lockdown. 44% have had a heavier workload since working from home, and 31% have seen a direct impact on their mental health, resulting in depression, anxiety, and exhaustion. So, you know, some of those, they may, you know, it's about how is that impacting on your business? Is that something that you recognise? I've got some more statistics. So a survey which was carried out within 2021, this is research of more than 30,000 people across 31 different countries. This is reflecting this, that 1 in 5 say that their employer doesn't care about their work-life balance. 45% of people surveyed felt overworked, and 39% of those felt exhausted. So burnout is something, you know, which the stats are showing us, but actually through the conversations that I'm having with business owners, with managers of teams, this is something which we're seeing a lot more of. So what can we do about that? What are some of the solutions that we can come up with? So one of them is about releasing that stress valve, and without a doubt, some stress is good. Some stress can help to motivate us, it can help to focus us, it can help to drive us forward. But burnout results from prolonged periods of heightened stress. So it's really important to take the opportunity to release some of that stress on a regular basis to avoid that prolonged build-up. So how can you do that? Well, it's about giving people a real sense of control over their workload, over what they can do, over how they can do it and when they can do it. So for example, it might be about giving people the opportunity to flex their working day around some of their other responsibilities or their interests. It might be taking more regular breaks or longer lunch breaks to enjoy this great weather that we're having at the moment. It might be, you know, to be able to take exercise classes, or to continue that kind of lockdown stroll in the countryside. This will produce huge mental health benefits and also physical benefits to your team. And by shifting the focus to the outputs rather than the how and the amount of time that's worked, that's going to help to relieve those stress, and it's going to help to create that creativity, innovation, and also drive accountability. When it comes to recharging, the average worker apparently last year had 14 days of unused holiday throughout the year, which is a huge amount. So furlough aside, burnout clearly is apparent. It's on the increase. And whilst we're not yet in a position to hop on a plane and go to Thailand or, you know, the Algarve or wherever we want to go to, it's still really important that people have time to have some downtime. This always on culture, it really does cut into an individual's downtime. You've only got to switch on the TV or the radio, and there's a lot of quite negative, quite concerning, quite, you know, tricky information which is being imparted, and we're being bombarded with this constantly, and all of this impacts an individual's ability to recharge. It affects their ability to refuel their resilience levels, and so encouraging your team members to use their downtime really effectively is really important. So how are they spending that time? Are they spending that downtime doing things which are going to help to recharge them, which are going to have a positive impact on them, and not to deplete them? Also, it's about prioritizing your listening. So what are your team telling you? What are they saying when they're not saying anything at all? And it's really sometimes difficult to pick up on those non-verbal cues, especially when people are working remotely and you're having to communicate in this sort of medium. But actually being able to regularly check in with all of the team members, because they're all going to be experiencing these ups and downs at different times. So even if they are returning back to work and they're fully energized, you know, that may have peaks and troughs. So regularly checking in will help you understand what's going on in real time with your people. Ask them what they need, and ask them what kind of help and support that they need. And if it's not within your particular area of expertise or skill sets, if you need to seek the expertise or specialist somewhere else, then do that. Get the very best support for your team. When it comes to well-being, employers, we've always had a duty of care in relation to the well-being of our employees. But I think that what COVID has done is it's really kind of brought that to the forefront, and it's emphasised more than ever the need to treat people as a whole. So there's no doubt a myriad of emotions that are going through all of us during these times. Absolutely, the lines between home and work are blurring, and people are feeling quite isolated, even when they're returning back to work. You know, that ability to share what's going on with them, that does come quite difficult to some people. They're concerned about their financial insecurities, their job securities, and you know, these are real concerns that we need to take into consideration, and we can't just, upon a return to work, get swept back up in that day to day. You know, there are loads of great initiatives that businesses are implementing, from employee assistance programs to one-to-one personal coaching with individuals, individual and team wellbeing sessions, group exercise classes, buddying, more closely monitoring hours of work and workloads for individuals. what may have been overlooked in the past or be seen as a nice to have is actually a necessity. So have a look at what your well-being strategy is, get a plan together and make sure that it is fit for purpose, that people are finding value from it. You know, that if you need to adapt it to meet the needs of the business, that you're regularly doing that piece of work. Very quickly, the right to disconnect. Some of you may be aware that a law was passed in 2017 in France, and that requires companies with more than 50 employees to set out times when staff shouldn't be sending or answering emails. And this right to disconnect is really about this kind of whole work-life balance, this blurring of boundaries, this trying to not create these situations which result in burnout. And there's a number of countries which are following suit, and there's organisations which actually, you know, they're not waiting for legislation. This is part of the culture, that right to disconnect. So that could really help to combat that burnout. So that's something that you may just want to think about as well. Moving swiftly on, so if your employees are experiencing burnout, if they're disengaged, if they're dissatisfied, then without a doubt this is going to have an impact on retention. Okay, so some more stats for you, if I may. 41% of the global workforce is likely to consider leaving their current employer within the next year or so. 3 in 5 workers intend to make a change to their careers as a result of the pandemic. And those between the ages of about 25 to 34, they are most likely to want to retrain or pursue a different career. And interestingly, there's a disproportionate number of females which are actually leaving the workforce as a direct result of this pandemic as well. So this degree of churn, you know, it's going to have a really significant impact on every business. So it's something that we need to be aware of and think about how we can avoid, you know, these high retention rates within our own business. So what can we do? You know, this leads on to the next slide, which is engagement. And engagement is not a nice to have, it's absolutely a necessity. Together, we can build the new normal. So it's not about one single person taking the lead and driving it through. It's a perfect opportunity to get your team together to plan what that new normal looks like. So 2021 now is a great time to really assess how this pandemic has impacted your business and what does that mean. So how has it impacted your business? How has it affected the business plan, your vision, your values, your objectives? By engaging your team and encouraging them to take part in redefining what your vision, your mission, and your values are, that can be an incredibly valuable way of bringing that team together, especially after such a prolonged period of time that they could potentially have been disconnected. So how have your business changed, objectives changed? You know, it's about every individual understanding, what are we going after now? What does that future look like? What do I need to do? How can I contribute? What does that mean to me? What do I need to go and do with that now? And really bringing it down to that individual level, that's really going to help build that engagement. Equally, what's your communication strategy? So if you've been really regularly communicating with your team and you genuinely be interested in their health and their well-being and finding out what's going on for them, that will need to continue in the future. You can't just drop it and kind of get back into the day-to-day because the level of expectation is there. But do, as a word of caution, when you're communicating, just be aware of that barrage of, you know, those unplanned, unstructured meetings, those impromptu team calls or going on to chat. That can add to time pressure, that can add to stress, which ultimately could lead to disengagement and also to burnout. If you're looking at that hybrid model, then remember, you know, to include all team members within that. And we've seen some great examples of where organisations have got, you know, champions that if there is a group call, that their role is to ensure that those people that are dialing in remotely have as much of a voice as those people that are physically there in the meeting, to ensure that all of the team members contribute and are engaged. When it comes to training and development, this is something which may have dropped off the pad a little bit for various different reasons, but you need to think about, have your skills, particularly of your managers, have they got the skills and knowledge needed to be able to manage these different working practices, to manage people remotely, and to manage the kind of hybrid model. Equally, have they got the skills and the experience to manage, more of these soft skills, so that the health and well-being challenges that their team members may be displaying. Equally, this is about making sure that if there have been changes in processes and systems, actually people are being refreshed, or they're being given these new skills, and not just expected to kind of hit the ground running. When it also comes to the team, it might be that there's been a number of people that have been furloughed. They might not have physically seen each other for a long time. So taking the time to establish that team unity, to build up that camaraderie, to really lift people's spirits and build that morale. And there is an abundance of study which shows that actually conversations and celebrations, those are the aspects which people are really, really missing when they're disconnected, when they're kind of dialing in because they're remote working. So if you're having a lunch ordered at work, for those people in the workplace, for those remote workers, what are you doing for them? Could you send them a lunchbox in the post? Could they just dial in and then you all kind of share it together? Think about how you can bring all of those different team members together. And then lastly, it's about the recognition and reward piece. So are you rewarding those right behaviours in terms of creativity and innovation? Are you looking at new working practices and things like that? Don't just leave it to those quarterly and annual reviews. Do it in real time, really reinforce those behaviours, because a thank you and an acknowledgement goes a really long way. Remember, when you've got different working models operating within your business, out of sight is not out of mind. So what are you going to do next? Hopefully what my session has done has given you a little bit of food for thought, but what we have done based on the queries that have come on with our clients and the calls that we're taking on, we've created a bundle of documents, guides, policies and templates, and this is our return to work toolkit. So you can see the contents on the slide now, and what this is going to do is it's going to give you your time back so that you can focus on the demands of your business. You can see that it's got everything that you need in order to keep you on the right path, to avoid the pitfalls and minimize any mistakes that are made when you're bringing your teams back in to the workplace. So thank you so much for listening, and I will hand back to Dave.
Thanks, Charlotte. Thanks very much for that, Charlotte. Really enjoyed that. I must say, there's lots of stuff that you're talking about there, what Poundgate's currently are considering, and certainly some great advice and tips, which and some fascinating stats as well in there. So thanks very much for your presentation. Just a reminder, for those who haven't used Zoom much before, there is a Q&A icon on my screen. It's at the bottom. If you just hover over it, you can see. So we'll be taking questions at the end. So if there's anything that Charlotte has said there, or obviously the next two speakers that prompts a question, please just type it in the Q&A box and then we'll deal with that at the end of the presentation. Next up is Terry from Poundgate. So over to you, Terry.
Thank you, Dave. Good morning to you all. Yeah, I'm Terry Pryke. I head up the general commercial business sector for Poundgate's Insurance. I do appreciate that insurance isn't the most interesting of topics. I promise to keep this session today fairly brief, but it's important to say that having the right cover in place can give you good peace of mind, especially as we navigate the uncharted waters that face many businesses over the months, or over the last 12 months and the years ahead. Next slide, please. So working from home was seen as necessary, but a temporary solution to curbing the spread of COVID. Staff were released from their office desks and encouraged to find a corner of their home where they could do their best to keep things ticking along. But 1 year on, it's clear that many people wish to continue with their home working arrangements, whether that be full-time or through a hybrid solution. As an employer, you have the same duty of care to home workers as you do for office-based employees. The difficulty here being is you're not in people's homes. The structures that you would normally have in place to support your staff's well-being, they're not as readily available. And because of this, things can, and we know, do go wrong. The risk of claims against your business, therefore, is much higher. So insurers are already seeing the impact of this through a clear rise in employment claims during the pandemic, and sadly predicting a further dramatic increase in claims once furlough ends. Next slide, please. So what are the areas which are causing issues for home workers? Well, to start with, and what can you do to protect your employees and yourself as an employer? It will come as no surprise that having a DSC compliant workspace is essential. Cables do present trip hazards, so they should be addressed. Equipment must be tested, up to date, and the employee should have a supportive chair set up so that it will not lead to back issues or repetitive strain injury. Quick story for you. A few months ago, a friend sent me a photo of his new home working situation. Just wanted me to reply with a thumbs up, love it, good work and all that. But the risk manager in me could only see all the things that he'd done wrong. He had a small dining room chair, the laptop was at an odd angle, which just screamed neck pain, and there were cables everywhere. Rather than the expected thumbs up and high praise, all he got from me was insurance Terry, who pointed out that he had a lot more work to do. Yes, I did follow up and help him put things right after I had my fun. More subtly though than the workplace setup, is that you also need to consider the added stress and impact of your staff's mental health. Not being in the same building will make it much harder to spot when someone is struggling and needs additional support. Which moves us on to the next slide, please. Responsibility must be shared between you and your employees to create and maintain a safe home working environment. As the employer, you must take the lead to ensure that your staff are fully briefed on safe working practices and that they have access to the right services, online training materials, general health and safety guidance. This can include everything from workstation assessments to encouraging people to take breaks and move and stretch regularly. Next slide, please. Creating a system whereby managers are regularly in contact with their teams is essential. A lack of contact can create feelings of isolation, abandonment, and a disconnection from the company. This could ultimately lead to demotivation, decreased performance, and long-term sickness. Personal injury claims can be submitted against an employer for health problems resulting from alleged work-related stress. Moving on to the next slide. So there are many ways in which you as an employer can improve your staff's working environment to help keep them safe and well. Implementation of best practices should reduce the likelihood of claims. What covers are available to give you the peace of mind that you, the employer, are also supported? Next slide. There are three main covers that I will briefly touch on this morning. First is employer's liability. Cover that you will already have in place as an employer, as it is required under UK law. It offers protection against legal costs and compensation awards if an employee is injured or becomes ill as a result of the work that they do for you. Insurers will be looking for evidence that employers have embedded best practice into the business and steps are being taken to mitigate risks. This can and may affect whether you are offered cover or not in the future. As a side note, I recommend that you check your current policy to ensure it extends to employees' homes and is not limited just to your commercial premises only. Next slide. Employers' liability is only concerned with injury and illness. It doesn't cover other areas where there has been a dramatic rise in claims this past year, which includes alleged unfair dismissal following redundancy processes, changes to flexible working rights and hours, sex discrimination, race and religious beliefs, disability and age discrimination. There are specialist products available that will provide financial protection against legal fees and compensation awards for these types of claims, which I will now touch on. Next slide, please. So first up is legal expenses cover, which can provide financial protection. Some providers also offer additional support, such as access to online letter and contract templates, employment contracts and furlough arrangements, as well as home working guides and 24/7 legal advice, and that can be COVID related or more general wider legal advice. Should be aware though that these policies also protect the insurer through a prospect of success clause. This means that the insurer does not have to support a claim where it is unlikely that the client will win or successfully defend their case where the prospect of winning is below 50%. Next slide, please. This clause does not feature in the final policy that I will mention today. That is employment practices liability. This is a section of cover offered under a management liability policy, also known as directors and officers or D&O. This cover is designed to protect you from claims resulting from past, present, prospective employees or alleged wrongful employment practices. Prior to the pandemic, claims under this type of policy already accounted for the majority of those submitted to insurers under a management liability policy. As predicted, insurers are experiencing unprecedented volumes of claims submissions at this time. This has resulted in what we refer to as a hardening of the market for this product. Cost of premiums are rising significantly. Cover limits are being reduced. Some insurers are no longer offering this section of cover at all. This may change in the future. Next slide, please. So I've offered here a brief overview of these types of products today and recommend to speak to your own broker about what product is right for you. Just as a final thought, I would recommend that you review your current business insurance policy just to ensure that your equipment is covered when away from your office premises for home use by employees. Again, if you're in doubt, speak to your broker. Just to touch on something that Charlotte mentioned during her earlier on, the cyber issues are increasing for businesses, especially with home working. I haven't covered it today, it's a much broader topic, but there are insurance products available for a multitude of risks associated with cybercrime. And again, I would recommend that you speak to your broker, or I'm happy to take a call outside of the webinar if this would be of assistance. That's all from me this morning. Thank you for listening, and I will hand back to Dave.
Thank you, Terry. Yeah, I mean, just to sort of confirm some of the things Terry just said, we too often do see clients cover which doesn't meet their needs. I think over the last 12 months, especially where maybe businesses have diversified some of their services, particularly obviously in how they now work, I would certainly recommend it. If you have any doubt at all, just speak to your broker to make sure your cover does apply and extend to the new working arrangements, because we do see that too often, unfortunately, where cover doesn't always match your needs. Anyway, before I hand over to our last speaker, just a reminder, I guess, that the Q&A at the bottom, so please do obviously have a think about any questions you'd like answered, and obviously we'll do a panel Q&A at the end. But yeah, just now to hand over to Matthew Gowan of Burke. It's all yours, Matthew.
Thanks very much, Dave. All I can say is the person in that picture you're looking at didn't have any grey hair. I certainly have got quite a lot now, but that's probably not pandemic related, that's just age. So thanks everybody. Andrew, if I could have the slides up, thank you. I'm going to talk about some of the things that you might want to think about as an employer when your people are starting to either return to the workplace or have decided maybe that they don't want to, and they'd like to stay at home. And it's really going to cover some of the things, some of the topics that you would have already been quite familiar with and heard about during the last 14 months or so that we've been embroiled in COVID-19. But it's also going to perhaps just develop on some of the things that you've heard about already, that certainly I perceive to be things that employers really need to focus on with their people. And that's from personal experience leading a team at Burkitt. So as you've heard, I had a regulatory and corporate defence team. So I have personal experience of managing a team of people throughout the pandemic. So some of what I'm going to say comes from that experience, and some comes from my professional experience in the sense of how we've interacted with our clients and what advice we've been giving to them and what issues they've been encountering during the pandemic. So hopefully some practical tips, and as Dave said, if you want to ask any questions, use the function. I'll try and do that live. If not, we'll catch up offline afterwards. Thanks, Andrew. We can skip straight to the next one, I think, because that's that very outdated picture again. So as we know, we've got a roadmap. So the government have called it out of lockdown. No earlier than the 17th of May is the next date. We're into step 3. And as you're probably aware, meeting outdoors to maximum of 30, indoor hospitality be opened up, cinemas, etc. There's a very huge list and long raft of things. Step 4 is potentially the last in that roadmap, and not before, it should be the 21st of June. Sorry for that typo. All legal restrictions should be lifted. I've put a question mark in there, and we'll come back to it in a moment or two, because if you read the guidance or the summary of the roadmap guidance on the gov.uk website, it's all very much caveated in the sense of they hope they will be able to lift all legal restrictions at that date, but obviously they're going to work to the data and the scientific data rather than the dates, but everything at the moment looks fairly positive. Thanks, Andrew. So as you've heard already, and as undoubtedly you know, work from home if you can. That's the current guidance. And the reality is we've seen, I think, that a lot of our people were able to adapt amazingly quickly. And most employers and most workforces who had people that were office-based, like obviously a law firm, our people were able to adapt to a different style of working quite quickly. And obviously there had to be investment in technology, but the reality is, to a degree, at the moment, those people who were still able to work from home should. There's the well-being piece, which Charlotte touched on, which I think, and I'm going to talk about a bit later, is very significant, and I'll come back to it. So many can work at home, proper equipment, maybe adjustments for how they work at home. Those are important things that you need to think about. And in terms of the guidance, as you can see, employers should support to find reasonable adjustments to allow home working. So as employers, you should be discussing if people want to remain at home rather than coming back in the office, if you haven't already, how you might make adjustments to allow that to happen. And that could be adjustments in their working hours. We've had people, for instance, at Burkitt's, who in order to work effectively at home, have split their working day. Some are working early in the morning, and they've taken the decision then to have break during the majority of the day so they can look after their children, for instance. They can do the school run, they can pick them up, they can look after their elderly parents, whatever it might be, and then they're working a bit later into the evening, and that's after discussions. And it's all about really communication. It's all about discussing things with your teams. And of course, as you can see at the bottom, if you can't work from home because you're in an industry or an organisation where that simply isn't possible, and your workplace is open and safe in terms of COVID security, then obviously you can travel and you can go to work. Thanks, Andrew. So I talked about the 21st of June, and the aspiration at the moment that those legal restrictions will be lifted as of that date. Obviously, at the moment, in the context of gearing up to that, many employers, and Charlotte was talking about her experience earlier, and it's exactly the same for us at Burkitt's, starting to think about getting a little bit more of people used to the environment of being back in the office. So where we've had very low occupancy rates historically in the last several months, those occupancy rates are starting to go up a little bit, no more than about 20-25% currently across our 5 offices. And that's for people who have, in the conversations they've had with their team leaders, that people have said, look, I want to get some experience about coming back in the office. I want to remember what it's about. And I want to see what the COVID security is in the office. And we'll come to talk about that in a minute. So in the context of that, obviously mitigation measures are still required in the offices. And it's difficult to predict, but one can see a situation where even after the 21st of June, where there might not be regulation, there might not be law enforcing the position, there may well be guidance to say that officers should still adopt sensible measures of mitigation. And they will be along the lines of things we've heard about and talked about many times. So hygiene, of course. There may well be social distancing, the 1 meter plus. And if you haven't already given thought to it, as we've heard about before, you're going to have to think about how your people are orientated in the space and what is the distance between them and how long they're going to be in that orientation. And you might want to stagger reoccupation. I think from a practical point of view and from a well-being point of view, a lot of businesses who have an office-based environment are not simply going to say, this is the 21st of June, let's open the doors and everybody rush back in. I think a lot of people will want to work in a hybrid environment, so they'll want to do some home working going forward. And in any event, it just means it's sensible to stagger reoccupation. So you think about how you might do that, what people need to come back because it suits them in terms of their well-being piece or in terms of their practical arrangements. Tacked on HSE visits there. You may know, and you may have had one, but the HSE are visiting pretty regularly local employers, offices. As you've heard, Burkitt's his main office is in Ipswich. We've had a visit from the HSE, and our Norwich office has also had a visit from the HSE, although they couldn't get in because our COVID security was so secure. And they're there to check. They're there to check what is going on, what measures are going on. And so you want to make sure that you've got some process in place should the HSE come and visit. So who is it that's going to deal with the HSE? One point of contact really is the best, and that person should be in a position to be able to explain to the HSE what, if they can't see it themselves, what measures you've got in place and what plans you've got in place, because they'll want to talk about that as well. So that's something to bear in mind. Thank you, Andrew. Talked about sort of phased reoccupation, and these are obviously some of the sensible measures that you might think about surrounding that phased reoccupation. And it goes back to think what I was saying before about opening the door and letting everybody come in. You might want to think about how you phase people arriving and leaving. If they don't all need to be there at 9 o'clock and don't all need to leave at 5:30, you might want to also talk about them about how they get to work and what transport they use and what risks might be associated with that. And let's think about the general COVID security measures you've got. Are you checking their temperatures at present? If they come in, will you continue to do that after the 21st of June, even if there's no legal requirement to do so? I talked about how you orientate people in the space, which is an important consideration to make sure that there is as much space and free-flowing air between people in the office as possible. So you might want to sit down and think about how you do that and how people move around. So for instance, simple example, we have printer hubs in our offices on the floors. There's one entry and one exit at each end of those hubs. Usually pre-COVID, people would come and go from both. But now, of course, at the moment, there's one entry, one exit, and only one person in that printer hub at the same time. And you might think about one-way routes, through the floor in your office as well and round, so that people keep it as far apart as possible. Some offices, and we have a similar situation, they have pairs of desks or floors in little hubs. And at present, with people coming back, you've no doubt thought about how there might be screens in front of those people. Much better to have people diagonally than obviously face to face. You might want to think about whether or not it's easy to rotate people around within that space. And that probably goes back to how you schedule people going back into that office. And you might want to see as much as possible those same people coming into the space, so that there isn't too much mixing of people within the particular area of the office. We all know that Zoom and WebEx and whatever other video platform you're using has become and will continue to be really useful in the world of business and commerce as we move forward. But people do want that interaction. And increasingly, we've seen clients who say, can we come in? We want, you're going to talk about serious things with us. Yeah, we can talk about it over Zoom. We can talk about it over Teams. But can you actually come in? Can we actually see you and have that interaction? And I think you'll find that more and more now in the next few months before the end of June. So again, you've got to make sure that you have the policy in place for visitors coming in. Those visitors know what it is in advance, they know what's required of them, and obviously those meeting rooms have got to be sufficiently ventilated in the space to allow those things to happen. I've also talked about common areas as well in layout, and I think I've touched on that as well. Again, stagger breaks goes back to whether you actually need people doing all the same thing at all the same time. Thanks, Andrew. Well-being. I mean, this, and Charlotte's talked about it, and I was interested in some of the stats on her slides earlier. For me, this is really a significant piece within the health and safety sphere. We sometimes forget, and that's why I've actually quoted a bit of law. I try and avoid it in presentations like this, but that's Section 2 of the Health and Safety at Work Act. It talks about the health, safety and welfare. And that's the general duty that employers have towards its employees. And the welfare, I think, is really important. And it comes about in a variety of ways. And I think anxiety, obviously, about return is one of those. Because people have been operating in some degree of isolation through the pandemic, and because we know the heart-wrenching effects COVID's had on so many people in this country and beyond, that there is that overwhelming anxiety that some people still have. So I think for us as employers, if we are saying to our people, the environment is safe to return to, then you have to convince them of that. So you have to think about how you do that. Obviously inviting people in to the office to see the security, COVID secure arrangements that you've got if they haven't been in the office for, throughout the whole time, is one way of doing it. The other way, which some people have adopted, which is quite successful, is you simply video it. So you video the journey through the office. People coming to the front door, in Burkitt's case, because we've still got our front door shut, the back door, and showing them what the office is like. So showing them if the environment, the space has changed and how it's changed, showing them if you have a reception staff, how they are screened, where the temperature check is, etc., where the sign-in is. So you video it for them and show it to them and discuss it with them. and it comes back, as I talked about before, about communication. Because in some ways that anxiety is about the anxiety of getting COVID for a lot of people still, but that will diminish. And we've seen that diminish in sort of general life, haven't we, over a period of time, and more people vaccinated, that fear is going to diminish. But one of the things that people might still be anxious about is actually because they haven't been exposed to groups of people and they haven't had that interaction with people, a general anxiety, almost not quite an agoraphobic reaction, but a general anxiety to coming out again and meeting people. I went out with some friends for dinner in Woodbridge, near where I live, a few Fridays ago, and very nice it was outside, a bit chilly, but we survived. One of the things I found about that was the noise. I found it quite odd that, having not for 14 months or so been out like that really at all, I found the noise and the general hubbub quite odd. And speaking personally, it sort of resonated with me, and I can understand why some other people across the age range, I don't think it really matters how old you are, what your experiences are, do have that general anxiety about coming back. And so you've got to think about how you interact with those people, how you interact with your people, to convince them that everything is good within the office space for them to be able to come back, and let them do it, on a phased, staggered basis. If they want to stay working from home for a bit, or in a hybrid environment in the long term, and they can, and they're productive and they're well, then as long as it suits your business, then you should let them. And so it is about interaction, it is about communication. And health, safety and welfare is at its heart about making sure you have communicated your message, people know what the message is, and you can show that they're actually carrying out the steps within that message. So it's very important, I think, that those in a line management function, team leaders, are equipped with the tools to help those people. I think as Charlotte was saying earlier, we've done a lot of work with our team leaders about training them to spot signs of anxiety. I think in a general sense, we know our teams better. The lockdown and remote working over a period, I think we've got to know people that we've worked for a long time perhaps a bit better, because we've literally seen inside their homes and their everyday life. We've seen their kids running around, their dogs barking, and the cat jumping on their lap, whatever it might be. So I think you need to put those measures in place to allow those sort of team leaders to spot those signs and give them the tools about how to use them, and empowering your people to be able to confide in others. It doesn't have to be their team leader. There can be mental health champions, so people who they can go to have discussions with, and not be worried about that, and make it very clear throughout your workforce that there is no comeback for people who do that. And in fact, they should be empowered to talk about how they feel, because that's one way of getting to the heart of the issue, and that's one way of mitigating the risk from that issue. Because we've absolutely seen across the health and safety piece that good well-being has a positive impact on safety outcomes, and good well-being helps people be more productive. Thanks, Andrew. The last thing I was going to talk about, and we've touched on a little bit already, is the home office. Now, I appreciate entirely that many people have already considered this up to this point, but we are going to get people who want to stay at home, or who want to adapt to this hybrid environment. And there's absolutely no issue with that. DSE assessment, I think Terry touched on that. Yeah, absolutely. You should make sure that has been carried out. There are a lot of online tools for that assessment process. There's nothing wrong with doing that online. Obviously, if anything on that online process flags, then you'd have to screen those results, and potentially an occupational health professional would have to look at it if there's anything significant. But you can obviously give your people a lot of information about how they set up that home office, how they set up their workstation, tips they need to make sure you're reducing the risk. Because health and safety requirements apply to employers across the piece, even if the employee is at home. Obviously, working at home means the risk is far reduced, so the measures you need to put in place may be very different, but the obligation is still there for you. Provision of equipment. It has to be safe and fit for purpose. There's nothing wrong with asking people what equipment they've got, what they might need. That's all part of the conversation. And it's important that there is that element of supervision. There has to be that element of oversight of those people at home. And so again, in terms of team leaders and lines of management, you've got to support them. You've got to give them the training, give them the tools to be able to have these very different conversations with people, because they're not in an office environment with them. They're not looking at these people all the time. So they've got to have the training and the understanding of how to conduct supervision in a slightly different way to ensure that there is the health and safety or well-being of all our people at all times. Thanks very much for listening. Over to you, Dave.
Thanks, Matthew. Again, lots of food for thought there, and certainly it's useful guidance. I love the video tour idea, actually. I think that would really sort of reassure people, so I'll probably take up on that one. I'll probably skip the HSE visit, though. Right, okay, so say last reminder, Q&A, any questions? We've had a couple come through. If there's any more, please type them in the Q&A icon at the bottom. So we've now come to the end of the formal session, so it's now for time to do the questions. So if I just pick up the first one that's come through, just bear with me a second. It's probably more aimed at Matthew, I suspect, this one. So we'll start with Matthew and see what you think. The question is, can workplace testing be enforced, or is it just recommended?
Workplace COVID testing.
Yeah, COVID testing.
Yeah, I think this is probably a sort of combination of both from an HR perspective. And this is, Charlotte's nodding, and we get this a lot. It's a balance, and I think I don't know what Charlotte's view about it is. There aren't any, as far as I'm aware, legal requirements for that to take place. And indeed, at Burkitt's, we don't do that. We obviously have a policy. And like many employers, we have faith in our people to follow the national guidance, which is if you have any of those symptoms, you don't come in. But obviously, we have a temperature a device on all our receptions. So if anybody's exhibiting any of the symptoms or a high temperature, they can't come in. So no, there isn't any legal obligation for you to do that. Be interested to hear what Charlotte thinks about what an employer could do to say to people, you have to take a test. I mean, it's quite different from the temperature test, because obviously that takes just a few seconds. And from our perspective, that is an obligation on everybody, not just our people, but any visitors to our sites have to do that. That is part of our risk assessment, which is our risk assessment. So we as an organization obviously have duties to our employees, but to our non-employees under the Health and Safety at Work Act. We've assessed risk. We've obviously published our COVID risk assessments in line with the guidance. And so we have determined that that is what has to happen as part of our risk assessment. So everybody has to go through that process. So I think before I hand over to Charlotte, if a business has determined that the risk is such that they need people to take a test, then that would be enshrined within their risk assessment. But obviously there are practical difficulties with getting people to take lateral flow tests at literally there and then. There might be a difference if you're saying you need to prove that you've had a lateral flow test and it is negative in a period of time prior to coming in.
Over to you then, Charlotte.
So I agree with everything that Matthew's just said, which is good. So we're not going to have a ruck. I know. I think from a kind of people perspective, it is absolutely right. It's about really communicating and engaging your teams on the reasons making them aware of what to look out for, what the symptoms are, the importance of what we're doing, what steps, and engaging them in what steps the organisation is taking to make sure that they as individuals, but also that their team members, that their colleagues and anyone coming onto site, what measures are being taken to protect them. And it's about understanding, because I think what may have prompted this question is, well, we want to be able to categorically prove that individuals haven't got COVID, but the sticking point is, what happens if you get somebody that says, I don't want to do a test, I'm not prepared to do a test, or I'm not, and this will extend to the vaccine. I said earlier, there's some people which aren't able to have the opportunity to have a vaccine yet because of the rollout scheme, but there are still going to be some people that don't want to have a COVID vaccine, regardless of whether it's available to them. And so again, it's about trying to understand people's fears, anxieties, their motivations, the drive behind their behaviours, behind their thoughts and their opinions, and working with them to determine the facts, because, people are getting their information from lots of different sources, and you can go on and you can Google it and you can come up with lots of different types of contradictory information. But the more that you can communicate with the individual and find out what those anxieties are, and come up for alternatives, because there is always an alternative, as Matthew's just said, without having to do a lateral flow test. And I have to do them regularly because I've got 2 children at school, and so that's, parents have been asked to do that, so I do it. I can't stand it, it's horrible in reality, but I choose to do that. But there are other things, there are other symptoms which are prevalent. You can do those non-invasive temperature checks. So there are methods, there are different approaches that you can take to gain the same outcome.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. Another question has just come in. It's saying, how do you recommend managing issues such as fire marshals and first aiders if the numbers on site are too high? And it goes on to ask then, if the numbers on site are too high for the fire marshal and first aiders, can you send people home?
Hi, Dean. Hope you're well. Yeah, I think the answer to that is, again, going back to what I said before about risk assessment. So any employer would have conducted a risk assessment, and the numbers of people in their workspace vis-a-vis, the number of fire marshals, first aiders will be part of that risk assessment. So if you think there are too many people on site for whatever reason, and therefore the parameters of that risk assessment are being stretched, if not exceeded, then yes, I think there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And I was saying before that at the moment, I think there is a sort of a bit of a tension between the guidance of can work at home, and as Charlotte was saying, a lot of business leaders and employers obviously wanting to get people back in the office or onto their work site, in a staggered sort of way. And so I think you've really got to look at trying to keep numbers at a manageable level. I think I said earlier we're at sort of 20%. I think notionally we're not going to go above 25%, depending on the teams within that environment. So the answer to the question is yes, and I think it all comes back about how you right at the outset assess the risk. Okay, great. Nothing to add there, Charlotte, I assume? Very no. Probably one last question. We have sort of touched on it a little bit in the presentation earlier, but and this is probably applicable to a couple of people in my team at the moment. They're sort of, when can they start going out again and start visiting clients, and in particular, what do you need to do? So I know you touched on that a little bit, Matt. Do you want to just expand on that? Yeah, so we've had again that sort of tension, Dave, because we have, if you're thinking about individual clients, private clients, there's quite a wide demographic, but some of those, because of age and health, would have been in sort of high risk categories. So for a long period of time, we restricted sort of quotes home visits, face-to-face meetings in people's homes. I think you can start to do that. So particularly if the person you want to go and visit isn't able to come to you, you can work by going to them. But you obviously have to have a separate risk assessment for that, for those home visits, and you'd have to think about what protocols you would need in place. So you'd want to, obviously assure that those people are not exhibiting any symptoms. It's about not only protecting your people, but of course it's also about protecting the people you're meeting as well, particularly if they're in a more vulnerable category. So yeah, I mean that can start to happen under a risk assessment, and make sure that that risk assessment is obviously trained and people are following that within your particular business.
Yeah, great. Okay,
Can
thank
I
you.
just add to that? Sorry,
sure.
Dave. I think that because we are starting to go out to clients ourselves, the HR consultants team, and it's really quite exciting to go out. So as long as it is COVID secure, and as Matthew's just said, the risk assessments have been undertaken, and our consultants, because they're people, they enjoy that, and they've really missed that ability to go out and meet client sites, but recognizing that isn't always going to be the case, that individuals aren't going to be comfortable necessarily going out to other sites. And so that leads to, well, can you force them to do it? Again, this comes back to regardless of what the law says, it's about people, and it's about communicating with them and trying to understand what their anxieties and what their concerns are and how you can address those. One of them might be that rather than, if it's possible, for them to go into the unknown, because as much as you would want, a risk assessment will need to be done, you'll expect the other party to have carried out their own risk assessments and be taking their own precautions. It might be that you create a work space within your environment that you're able to control, and that rather than your people going out, actually you invite visitors to come in, so that you can much more closely kind of control and make sure that you've got the COVID safe elements in place. So it really is just about giving people that confidence that you're taking it seriously, that you're willing to look and explore at different opportunities, and put those safety measures in place. Because even, if you try and force someone to do something, it's just going to end badly.
Brilliant. Okay, we'll call this the last question because of time. So last one is reference hybrid working and the phase return to the office and when restrictions are lifted. Just advice on how to manage the company equipment when employees are working both from home and in the office. Who wants to pick up that?
Are we talking about protection for the equipment insurance? I assume that's what we're looking at here.
Possibly, yeah. I mean, the health and safety aspect of it, I guess, as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think the question might be, Terry, do we want an environment where on a Monday, Dave is working from home with his equipment, and then on a Tuesday, he packs it all up and brings it into the office? And obviously, we haven't necessarily cleaned it and sprayed it down and all that, which is a consideration. And again, it comes back to how you've assessed risk when you've thought about people returning or people working at home. In terms of what we've done, we supplied so initially we asked people what they had at home, and there's nothing wrong with that. And if people have got the kit at home that will help them work, then they don't need anything else. But for those people that didn't have it or required maybe an extra screen, so an extra monitor or whatever, we provided it for them, and so they have it, and that is what they use at home. And then when they come into the office, the kit is still there, and typically all they need to bring, there might be a little connector just to connect into our system at the office, which they can literally sanitize when they get back. So it is something to think about, but again, it goes back to how you assess the risk. And if you're thinking about my monitor, which is just here, is quite heavy, and frankly I don't want to lug that in to the office, so you've got to think about that as well. So it is something to have consideration to. I know other businesses where people didn't have a kit. Rather than providing it for them, they gave their employees a choice. So they said, look, we approve basically these types of monitor. We're happy for you to go and buy them and expense them, or we're going to give you £350 to buy what you need. You just need to tell us what you've got, and then we can come and assess it, or we can do an online assessment to make sure it's safe to use.
Yeah. Okay, great. So that concludes the questions. So we're at the end of the formal part of the webinar. So feedback is obviously really important to us. So you will all receive an invitation to complete a feedback questionnaire, which would be grateful if you complete, but it won't take very long. And in closing the webinar today, I'd just like to thank Charlotte, Terry and Matthew for their insightful presentations. I'd also like to thank Carol Berman for her support with getting this webinar in place, and also Andrew for managing the technical aspects of the webinar. So thanks again for all of you attending, wishing you a successful year ahead, and all the best and goodbye.